Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of our Artist Forum here at the Center for Humanities Research, UWC. My name is Itumeleng Hulere. I'm the convener of the Factory of the Arts, and I convene the Humanities in Sessions Artist Forum. So today, we are fortunate enough to have this session that focuses on the work and photography of Cedric Nunn, who will be in the conversation with Candice Jansen. Nunn is a South African born and raised and based of the fourth generation mixed race parentage. He began making photographs in 1982, joining the Johannesburg-based Photographic Association agency, Afrapix, in the same year, and was submitted until it closed in 1990. He has continued to work independently as a documentary photographer and artist, showing his work in galleries and museums in South Africa and abroad. In 2019, Nunn won an inaugural FNB Johannesburg Arts Fair Prize and was awarded the eThekwini Living Legends Award. In 2016, he has published 2 monographs, Call and Response, and Unsettled 100 Years, was the Xhosa resistance against the Boer and British. He also conceived and directed 2 video documentaries, Blood Relatives and In the Shadow of Isandlwana, the Rorke Drift Arts Center story. He now lives in Mangethe on the KwaZulu-Natal South Coast. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Cedric Nunn at the Center for the Center for the Humanities Research. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Candice, and I'm very excited to have Cedric here today. I should tell you a little bit about how I know Cedric. I first learned of Cedric Nunn as a photographer when I was younger and in the United States, actually. And that's where I first saw your images. And I remember seeing these images of people who we would think of presenting as classified as colored. And I was fascinated by the representation of these figures in the way that they were ordinary, and there was a tenderness to these images that stayed with me. And I've been thinking with Cedric ever since. That started in the early 2012. And since then, I've used Cedric's work in my curatorial practice. I curated an exhibition at Duke University called Mangethe, and your images were really important for that. And I went on to do half of my PhD on your work, along with the photographer Ernest Cole, to think about color classification, in fact, as part of the struggle of Black consciousness in the way in which you worked through your own activism in South Africa. So yeah, Cedric is one of my teachers, and it's really exciting to be able to catch him while he's here in Cape Town during a residency and have you share your work here with us today. So I don't know how you would like to proceed. Would you like to take us through your images? I mean, I was talking today that it's so special to be able to see these images. We don't get to see these images very often. And so I'm very excited for you to show some of your work, and maybe you can talk us through some of the images you've prepared for today.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah, it is an oddity about being on this continent that often you hear that people have to go abroad to the headquarters of empire to find out more about who we are. But that's the way it is, and it's understandable in a sense. It is also very odd that I'm in most public collections in South Africa, actually. But I'm in this Duke collection, and they produced a. I'm sure I hope you might bring a copy of it. They produced a catalog of the collection called Beyond Beauty, and my image was on the front cover and the back cover of that catalog. So it's been great working with Candice, because it's always good to have an academic perspective. Candice has that prolonged interaction has had quite an effect on me in helping me just expand my vision as well. So it's a two-way street, I think, as these things should be. I'm going to show a little bit of a retrospective, I guess, because what I thought I'd do, I've got into the habit in the past of, when I do talks, of not showing images. So I've been doing that for like the last 10 years or so. I do talks, and I just, at some point, I thought we need to talk about photography. I have a blog called Some Things Need to Be Said, or I have a YouTube channel, Cedric's Photo Talks. So, but of course, Candice was like, no, we need to see your images, and it's, I think it's also important to talk to the work as well. So what the format here is, I've selected my more important solo exhibitions, and I've presented them in the way that they evolved. So this work, called Blood Relatives, is the work that I began with when I came to photography. It's the very first work that compelled me. When I chose to become a photographer, I was still very young. I was in my early 20s, and I had been dealing for some time with identity, the big identity issue of being colored, so-called colored, and to work through that issue in a way when it was still not yet seen as an issue. But I had come in the 70s already through the movements. I've been affected by the movements and influenced by the movements of first negritude of the Caribbean and the West Africa, and then by the Black Power movement, Black Panthers in the US, and then, of course, Black consciousness here. And I'm a country boy. I grew up in Zululand, then Zululand. Finding information back then in the day was really difficult. So I was picking up stompies along the way with all these things, trying to find. Literature was non-existent almost. So you really had to search for information. And I wonder how, if young people know the extent of the fortunate age they live in now, where information is at the click of your finger. It was really difficult back in the day to find information. So this journey, and photography is a wonderful thing, is that it allows you, it's like a meditative practice in a way, where you can look for images and then look at those images for a long time and go back and look for more images and think about that whole process of what you're looking at and what you're trying to find. And so the images you're seeing here is just the reflection of that journey that I went on. And so here you see, I come from a bit of an unusual family. So I used the camera as a tool to go out and explore that family, as well as look at this issue of being colored. So you've seen you've read the text, so I'll just move on. If I can get this, there we go. So this is where I live right now, as you guys can see. This community has changed quite a lot, as have most apartheid communities, since ironically since the end of the beginning of democracy, because of course people are able to move now. They're no longer trapped in those kind of ghettos that they were trapped in the past, and the images have the communities have transformed quite a bit. So this exhibition was first shown in 2005 at Constitution Hill, and in fact it was only shown there. I think it showed it in Durban as well at the Durban Art Gallery. So this image is of my grandmother. So Amy Lowe is my grandmother, and Candice and I. This is one of the issues, one of the themes that we will be exploring, because as Candice pointed out to me, this documentation that I did of this grandmother of mine, who I photographed quite consistently over more than 20-year period, about 23 years until she died, is the longest that any black woman has been documented consistently as a project in South Africa. So we are hoping, Candice is hoping to explore a whole lot of issues using this as a kind of a portal and a vehicle to do so. I'm very much a documentary photographer, and that's what I've been and still am throughout my career. I still find this medium compelling, even in the days of digital glut. So I've got an archive of maybe about 600 images of my grandmother's life out in this remote. I'll say just a little bit about her. I found that as when I rediscovered her in my 20s, because when I was a kid, I was dragged up to this like God forbidden place, like really in the sticks in the back of Beyond, and as a kid, it wasn't the most pleasant. Her environment was so alien to ours, to the world that I lived in with my parents, that it seemed primitive and backwards and all of that. But in my 20s, as a conscientized young 20-year-old, or even in my late teens, I realized that this woman lived an absolutely extraordinary life. And I think this is something else that Candice has been, seen as quite compelling. That she continued to live in a homeland where she had lived all her life. She refused to leave, so she engaged in an act of refusal, and lived there until the end of her life, that act of continuing to live in that environment gave me a portal of what could have been had apartheid not been successful in its social engineering program. The beauty of just people just living together. So this huge family that I come from, this was another old lady that also lived to 100, and I photographed her 100th birthday party. And there you see that's her father, and he was the progenitor of this clan of pretty much over 100 kids, and she was one of the last surviving of those kids. and that fellow is the man she married. A lot of what I photographed back then, 86, doesn't exist any longer. This house burned down. My grandmother's house has disappeared altogether after she passed on. Sorry, wrong way. I'm planning to do an exhibition of this family and this community, which is going to be a standalone exhibition called The Descendants. So I'm hoping to do that in a year or two.
So I think what's so extraordinary when you encounter these images in the archive, we don't know it's your family. I only discovered that once I started to engage you. And I think that's quite, for me, something really important about the way that we live through the archive in ways that is often unexpressed, inarticulated. And what is also important for me about this work around your family is that you were doing it alongside your activism. Those two things actually are part of what's happening simultaneously. So talk a little bit about that movement between you working through your own personal predicaments, curiosities, as well as documenting the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yeah, I mean, and that is most of the Afrapix photographers have been typecast as sort of struggle photographers. But yeah, I mean, we're proud to be struggle photographers anyway. But we all did far more than that. We were deeply interested in, everyday life of people, because for me, and I think for quite a lot of other people, the tenacity that people display under duress is quite extraordinary. To see that, how people face difficult circumstances in life. And so this project, in a way, talks to that. The beginning of this project was the hidden years. I showed this in the 1996, so almost 10 years before Blood Relatives, I showed this work. And I only showed it once in Durban. It was meant to be a book. When I had actually had a publisher, it just didn't pan out. But it was exhibited. And this work, so in a way, reflects quite a bit of my activism, because it spans a period when I was involved quite a bit in documenting the struggle. But looking at these moments as well, because I come from a workers' background. I was, my early career was as a factory worker, and very interested in these phenomena of these border industries that have come close to collapsing now, but were sites of great exploitation. People earned really poor salaries there, and they were located to exploit people to the extreme. People still trapped in the homeland configurations of the apartheid era. So people would walk to work, for instance, to save the little money that they were earning. So this was, an early attempt, just looking at the way people lived in the sort of housing configurations. Kurt will know this well. Yeah.
KwaZulu-Natal is, yeah, not just your place where you come from. It really holds your imagination in so many ways. You've traversed both its urban and rural corners. Talk a little bit more about what KwaZulu means for you as a photographer and in your imagination through which you've physically moved across the province in quite vast ways.
Yeah, for instance, I was baptized in this church, or christened. I'm not sure. The very first thing that they do when you are born. It happened here. And the family legend has it that I came close to dying because I was placed in the family jeep, and somebody forgot to pull up the handbrake. And this picture doesn't really show it, but this thing sits on a hill on a shoulder, and it's quite a steep incline. So I had a very narrow escape at about 3 or 6 months old or so. Here. But this image, I was riding past here in '86. My family, KwaZulu is, when you ask me what does KwaZulu mean, KwaZulu is a very complex place because it's one of the youngest provinces since settlement, colonialism and settlement. But it's got, like most other places, such a tumultuous history. So my family and a whole bunch of colored people came here as refugees from the Zulu Civil War, where the area that they occupied under the second largest chief of the Zulus, who was Hamu, Nkosi Hamu, lost um, the well, didn't lose the battle. They were involved in the Zulu Civil War of 1883. And although they didn't lose the civil war, the opposing side made a deal with the Boers, and the land of Nkosi Hamu was ceded to the Boers and became the new Boer Republic. And we lost. We were all expelled violently from that Vryheid area, which was part of the new Boer Republic. And so arrived in this quite remote place, very much wilderness, deep wilderness. Its name is Inhlwati. Yeah, Inhlwati. Inhlwati in Zulu means python. It was a forested area full of pythons. In fact, my dad was a legendary python catcher. And so, yes, so this, of course, this, I was sitting in the shade, this beautiful stone church that sits now, subsequently built after I was born. And I'd been riding past on my motorcycle through this rugged country. Whenever I had the opportunity, I would go past the old country where all the community had now left, been exiled once again through this becoming a homeland for Zulus, and so the colored people had to leave. And I was sitting there, and I was gifted this image of just wondering whether this woman would walk from that house into the image and onto that cross, and she did. And so it's a statement. I mean, it's such an interesting image because religious people find it so compelling. It's like, my come to Jesus moment. But for me, it's also for me, it's the opposite. It's like the weight of Christianity on this landscape, And as I'm getting older, I'm changing that view a little bit. I'm getting more conservative in my old age. But but yeah, there are all those connotations, and that's something that's great about photography, is that you can bring your own, you bring your own vision to it. So this was a lot of this. I mean, there was a few years of photographing the Natal War. That's what it was known as back then, the proxy wars.
But again, the way that you photographed these wars pulled away from the spectacle of it. And they
Well, that's pretty much a spectacle.
not really. That's quite ordinary in some ways. But there's a quiet way that you photograph it as an aftermath, as a lived reality for people who have survived, not just those who have passed.
Yeah, I mean, I was a reluctant war photographer in every way. I was a bit of a coward. Wasn't, I wasn't going to be, I didn't want to sacrifice my life for this war because I knew what this war was. I knew the kind of war that it was. And I was conflicted by it because I felt that um, I was a freelancer, and I sold a lot of these photographs. These are the photographs that were in demand. And I was conflicted that I was earning money out of people's suffering, And this image in particular, this image pretty much typifies, it's the iconic image of that Natal War. Came to be seen as the iconic image. I made a packet of money out of this image, and I had a bit of a crisis, and I was like, so when you see that's in '87. So when the violence came to Johannesburg I was living in Johannesburg in 1990, 1991. What was it called? That horrible stuff that was happening there, the sort of again proxy killings that were taking place. I actually couldn't photograph it. I was like repelled from doing that kind of work. And that was the kind of bang bang club moment where people, made careers out of that. I was more attracted to this. And this is struggle. This is a trade union movement using theater to educate people about their history, about the history of the struggle, and all of that.
But wait, before we go to Johannesburg, just to stay with KZN and this image for a second, because I also wanted you to talk a bit about, what Durban was as a nexus within the anti-apartheid movement, not only for photography, but the trade union movement, and the influence that community had on you, and also in the way that you moved and photographed. Just say a little bit about that.
Well, I started working in this sugar factory in 1974. And the interesting thing about 1974 is that it was a year after what is known as the Durban moment, when the trade union movement resurfaced after being brutally suppressed in the 60s. And thank you. So I was on the factory floor when unionization came to our factory as well, and I was hugely influenced and impacted by that, and politicized as well. And so I had an insider perspective somewhat and connection through that. And then I became a sort of an unofficial, first for SATU and then COSATU photographer. I was never employed. They didn't have a budget to do things like that, but I did a lot of work in the trade union movement. And then because I'm from KwaZulu and I have some ability to speak Zulu. I'm not fluent totally, but I can converse. Working in KwaZulu was more meaningful because I could understand more and I could interact more with people. And that just gave me deeper levels of understanding and access as well. And I didn't spend a huge amount of time in KwaZulu-Natal. I was there from 86. I arrived at the state of emergency as it was declared, and until about 88. Then I moved back to Johannesburg. I've spent most of my time in Johannesburg. But it was a very fruitful period. I helped establish a sort of, I was part of Afrapix and helped establish the Afrapix office in Durban. And we worked very closely with a collective of journalists called Concord. And these were all graduates from the DUT journalism school. And some are luminary names today, like Fred Khumalo, quite a well-known writer today. But yeah, there was there was a great camaraderie that we would meet. We'd have sort of press meetings once a week and work on stories together, and so that period, I see an old comrade there, Zaidi, who I shared a house with when I first arrived in Durban. She gave me a piece of carpet to lay my head on. Zaidi has this way of taking in waifs, and Zaidi, you'll see a great photograph that I did when I stayed at your just up the road from you. Like literally, you can see the house that you were living in. A little later in this. So yeah, it was the I mean, it was an incredible life, you know, just being making sense of the state of emergency and making sense of the extraordinary violence we were witnessing as well. Usually in the aftermath, because we would respond, we would come to a place the day after there'd been incredible, you know, more a surge of violence of some sort or the other. And it was very debilitating at first because the ANC, the UDF, was not armed initially for the first 2 years of the violence, and so that we were attending funerals every weekend of the victims of state violence. So Johannesburg was an exhibition that I showed in France. It was part of an African cities, so there were several other photographers that showed there as well. And so I made most of these images in 1999, 2000, in a rapidly transforming Johannesburg. And so it's quite a bleak picture in a way, because the city hadn't, the city, Johannesburg hadn't, it was in that turbulence of radical change that was happening. The dust hadn't settled, literally. So the images look quite dark because of that, except for this one. But I mean, it's quite prickly as well, I suppose, the city of Johannesburg. I lived on this ridge for a bit. And I was to be able to walk on this ridge. And 2 or 3 years later, it was impossible to walk on that ridge. You took your life in your hand if you walked on that ridge. I also suffered with depression for many years, and was in therapy and finally on medication. And a lot of my work, I think, kind of reflects that dark space I was in a lot of the time. I learned afterwards, you know, because I read Freud and Jung and, you know, my search for sort of redemption and salvation and all of that. And I learned only maybe 10 or 15 years ago that there was an entire movement in South America called liberation psychology that was repressed by the repressive movements that you know, were suppressing South American quest for freedom. And liberation psychology is still not in any way a known thing, even in the psychology circles to this day. Most of those proponents of liberation psychology who were in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and some other countries were disappeared, actually. They were that great disappearing movement of people being abducted and murdered. They were subjected to that. So I could have benefited from liberation psychology. I was doing my own version of liberation psychology, I guess.
But of course, you've just survived the 80s. South Africa's euphoria by now is starting to wane. Activist movements have shattered, fractured. Makes sense. Makes sense that that was the case. How did you find yourself photographically after that? Not just psychologically, but as a photographer. How did you find your vision, in a sense, after that moment?
Through the grace of the universe, I think. I don't know, I mean, it was constant searching and a sense of self-preservation, that I saw a lot of people being involved in quite destructive behavior. And I came to photography with a sense of mission. And I felt after 94, 94 was a sleight of hand. How do you say it? Sleight of hand. Sleight of hand. 1990 was a sleight of hand. I have a project here that talks a little bit to that sleight of hand. And like we were shortchanged. So I spent a decade trying to figure what the fuck is going on. I knew something serious was going on. And my metaphor was, I don't have images of that. I don't really do metaphor in my work. But my personal metaphor was the way our cadres took to golf. I was like, you really think you're going to beat them in that game, dude? Ain't going to happen. These guys are streets ahead. So, yeah, I mean, I had to find my own way. And in the City of Gold, it's many people get lost there. Yeah, in those labyrinths.
But there's something about this city of Johannesburg, again, in photographic terms, where, yeah, people lose themselves, find themselves. It's a world to a swirl of sensory engagement that just, there's a lot of inspiration there. I mean, we love Johannesburg for that.
I do too.
Yeah.
Now, Johannesburg's incredibly meaningful for me. I'm very fortunate to have spent the time I spent there, and to come to understand the place deeply, and to have a deep respect for it, and almost a reverence for the city. So clearly this fellow was finding himself in Johannesburg.
It is a photographer's muse, for sure.
Yes, no, absolutely. As a country person, I found it very difficult to photograph cities. I found it very difficult to understand cities because it wasn't my primary experience. So I really struggled. So this is my mid-career retrospective called Call and Response. Kurt's nodding, he knows this place very well. Probably had your first kiss there. Yeah, this was one of those few amenities which were flooded, that the one pool that was for the city, that people, colored kids, could hang out at. And it was a fabulous place to spend your youth. When I first arrived in Johannesburg, I arrived here in 1983. I got off a plane from London. I was meant to be coming back to Durban, but I didn't have another plane ticket means to get. So I just pretty much stayed. And I used to live I used to live further up from here, and I used to walk into the city. So I used to walk through this landscape every day. And it was rapidly transforming at this point.
So talk about call and response. I mean, it was edited by Okwi and Wizo. We contributed an essay. There was also kind of a moment where South African photography moves into the art world, and there's a certain kind of currency that it has. Why did you do call and response?
Well, Okwi simply, well, not simply. Okwi did contribute. He interviewed me. So there's an interview with Okwi and myself, and I'm quite proud of it, actually. I think it's quite a compelling interview. But no, it was On the Map explains what the introduction of On the Map explains what call and response was. I was at the gallery at the time, and I'm referencing On the Map because that's a recent publication that Candice and I have been involved in, an arts publication of 14 essays on 14 artists. So Candice wrote an essay on my work.
Yes, and I actually have copies here for sale if anyone is interested to purchase, which I forgot to bring, but it's in my car.
Well, I'm glad I reminded you. So, so On the Map, the introduction to On the Map, I believe, is a seminal paper, and I mean, I'm really proud of Candice's writing text on my work as well, and all the texts in there are superlative, amazing text on, including Gabriela Goliath, to plug the book a bit.
Yes, edited by Mario Pissarro.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Mario's introduction to On the Map is a delving into the topography of the art world. He dissects it and lays it bare, in a sense. And he shows who all the players are and how it's all driven by money, essentially. This is the Western art world, right? What we're talking about. So, yes, so I was with the gallery, and the gallery said, yeah, we need to show your work, more. And I had been trying to produce a book for some time. As a photographer, it's one of the hardest things to do is to produce a book, because it's really costly and nobody buys the damn thing. And unless you are, I mean, when I say nobody buys it, David Goldblatt's first book, which is today like an absolute classic, was bought in bins, bargain bins, for the first 10 years. Firstly, he couldn't get a publisher, then he couldn't get, nobody was interested in the book, some Afrikaners photographed. So it's a huge issue, and the people that get books done are people who are in galleries, because the gallery wants to promote your work and get it out there so it's seen, and and the right people will see it and invest in the work. So I had that opportunity. It was actually published by Hachi Kanz, which is like premier German publisher, art publisher, and it's beautifully published because of that. And so I spent. I have an artist friend here where I was living at the time. I spent a year holed up in a little room without a door, editing call and response, which is 30 years of my work, pre-digital. So, like, looking through all the negatives and making the selection and making the entire. I edited it. I did all of that. I did have my gallerist and Jacob Lebeko, curator, and they did a really good job. I was so happy to have them to have them complete that editing, the curating process, and made it the impactful book. I think it is. It is largely responsible for me getting the Johannesburg Art Fair award. It was that work. It was this exhibition and the work that, when my gallerist said, "Oh, I'd like to promote. I'd like to submit your work for the Joburg Art Fair award," I laughed at him. I said, "Are you crazy? My work doesn't have currency in the art world, you know." And he said, "No, I think we should." And so it's thanks to this work and my crazy German gallerist that I got that award. I wouldn't have got it otherwise. So that's my brother with the dog on his lap, just having moved into his what do you call them? Low cost housing. RDP, not RDP exactly, but council housing, yeah. I'm intending to do an exhibition on sugar, because sugar is quite topical in KZN at the moment. The big factory is changing hands, almost closed down. The sugar industry went through a crisis, and I worked in the sugar industry, as you know, in my early years, and sugar is a terrible industry and crop. It literally has raped this province and decimated people. The great amount of poverty that we have in KZN is thanks to this industry that the colonists brought because it was a perfect exploitation crop. And I had the pleasure of being visited by 2 Egyptian artists about 6 months ago who came to talk to me. They were working on a project on sugar. And I was like, "Egyptians working on sugar? What are you?" And they were like, "We've been doing sugar from 700. In fact, the British and the French took sugar from there and took it into their colonies, you know. So in Egypt, sugar was an artisanal industry that everybody was involved in. And so it doesn't have that detrimental effect that this industrial level sugar that we experience has. So that's the definition. I learned so much from talking to those 2 young, amazing artists who are working on
So
illuminating.
I'm going to rush you a bit.
Yes.
We haven't even got to your trilogy yet. So in the interest of time, we have to go.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to do an exhibition on sugar. Yeah. This was I did quite a lot of work with this documenting this party, this movement.
So also why we haven't seen many of these images is also because you've been painstakingly digitizing your archive, which you have gorillaed through in the COVID period. I mean, how long did it take you? Took you a few years.
Yeah, COVID was great. It gave me the opportunity to hunker down and do that work. It took me about almost 4.5 to 5 years. I'm still working on it, actually. Yeah, so it's digitized now, and I'm starting an archiving project, so it will be seen at some point more often. This will be in the sugar industry work, the migrancy and the loneliness. These women were all making that huge sacrifice, and all of them said to educate our children, to raise great families. This is an image that people often look at and think it's some kind of discriminatory, but this is an incredible moment of elders supporting a woman in distress. So, so this is in the retrospective, but it's also in hidden years, because a lot of this was hidden at that time. You wouldn't see this normally. People wouldn't easily see this kind of evictions and what, more than 3 million people being moved about and families destroyed, communities destroyed. And Mozambique and Angola were the primary targets of the proxy wars, and both countries devastated, absolutely devastated. And South Africans were largely unaware, because it was, of course, censorship. It was hidden from us. And because of the language barrier, I think we didn't understand the extent to which they were targeted. So here you see traditions in transition through this kind of dislocation. So at some point with Candice, that will be an exhibition on its own, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, wow, where do you even begin to talk about my Amy? Yeah, I think, yeah, the commitment, the sustained attention, and the being with her in that space it's very special. It's very special what you did, and also learning about her life. Yeah, gave me a lot of language to think about, as you said, that refusal, and yeah, what that refusal means, not only for her but also for you, and I'm sure for Kathy, and even your daughters going forward. It's quite an extraordinary series with her, and seeing her age, seeing her evolve. It's quite beautiful.
And I'll just tell this anecdote. Her first act of refusal was when she was boarding a ship in Durban en route to Cape Town with the family that she worked for as a domestic worker. She worked as a domestic worker in this family, and they were bringing her to Cape Town. They were returning to Cape Town to settle here. And she got off that ship. She said, "I can't leave my mother. I'm not doing this." I would have been talking with a different accent had that happened. And she, the mother that she couldn't leave was a Zulu woman. And so these are the things that, the stories that have been lost along the way. So this exhibition, I'm going to try and go a little bit fast now, so I'll skip through this. I made this exhibition in 2012 to commemorate the 100 years of the 1913 Land Act that dispossessed so many people. And I chose two areas, this place, Cornfields, and another place called Gongola. Cornfields was where people had bought land in the early 1900s, probably around about 1910, 1911, knowing that this act was arriving. So communities came together and bought land so that they could not be subjected to the tyranny that was the Land Act. And the other place, Gongola, was where people had lost their land and traditional land, and then along the way, and then reclaimed it, and went to look at to look contemporary look at what that meant for them. And it wasn't a pretty picture.
It sounds like this is a kind of an important precursor to Unsettled and your thinking around questions of land and sites of memory.
Unsettled was germinating at this point. It was like I'd, you know, I was preparing for it. Yeah, I think you're quite right, Candice. You always have that insight that it definitely, you know, because I mean, land has always been an issue. As you know, I didn't ever see myself as a landscape photographer, but land was an issue throughout my career.
Yeah, because I've never seen this work before.
Okay, so this brings us to KwaZulu-Natal in Angola. And I'm sure most of you know about KwaZulu-Natal. This was a battle in 1988, where it's still hotly contested. The South Africans who fought the SADF South African Defence Force South Africans, swear they won this battle. But the rest of the global South knows that they saw the ass there. And when they saw the ass in KwaZulu-Natal, that changed the whole equation, because up until then the generals had been saying, yes, we can whip their ass, we can subdue this continent, blah blah blah. And the Cubans, who are now under siege, and the Angolans, the MPLA, tamed the South Africans here. And that changed everything. That made Namibia possible, the liberation of Namibia. But of course, the fall of the Soviet Union was also an ace in the card of the West, because that's what took us here into the neoliberal wilderness, the fall of the Soviet Union. We were led by the nose. We had no option, really, not much of an option, into neoliberalism. And the fact that 1 in 4 South African kids goes to bed hungry today was that path we took then. So this battle was really important. I made 2 trips there with an incredible character, Cape Town character by the name of Lars, Colonel Patrick Ricketts, legendary character, who was running battlefield tours at the time. And he would take us, I was just fortunate to be able to go with him and experience and see the destitution. When I went in 2005, I was going into almost a medieval situation in Angola. And I'd seen that in 1990 in Mozambique as well. This place is all pretty much transformed now. It's like it's coming into the modern world. I haven't been able to go back, but I don't think you'll find any of this there any longer. So this was also early aftermath photography.
Photographers are kind of undertakers in some ways.
Yes, absolutely.
So as you page through this, talk to us about color and black and white and how you negotiate that.
I struggle with color. I don't understand it. I spent too much of my formative years in black and white, and I didn't go to art school or any of that, so I don't have the I don't have the I don't have any, and I'm also somebody who struggles with technical things. And photography is a technical medium also, so I'm a bit of a misfit. I also call myself not a photographer's photographer. So I came to photography when I shouldn't have, because I'm not like sort of a natural photographer. I came to photography as an activist looking for a medium. So I'm a little bit of an ill fit in it, and it's just the way it is. You make compromises in life.
We've hit the 2:00.
And we haven't got to Unsettled.
We haven't even got to what's occupying you right now.
Okay, I'll just click through and we can
Yes,
start
yes.
talking about that. This is pretty much the last one. Okay, I'll skip through this. This is not that important. It's very interesting images, but because it does look at contemporary South Africa in, I think, quite a compelling way. But there's a lot. So when I keep clicking until I get to what is, while I introduce what is, until I get to what I'm going to introduce now. What's occupying me now has been occupying me for the last almost 15 years. I work very slowly, and I also work in a resource-scarce environment. So things often take a long time to happen because there's just no money to make them happen. And so I've been working on a trilogy that I call, tentatively, I call it Joining the String. Dispossession, erasure, and genocide. And it looks at 3 epochs in the formative age of South Africa, precisely from 1652 until 1887. 1887, I think it is.
Don't look at me. There are actual historians in this
I'm
room.
terrible with numbers, so just forgive me.
I'm sure that
But
they will help
you'll get. So I started when I was opening my call and response, my retrospective. I got to show it in Berlin as well. And when I was showing it there, this is the beginning of it. When I was showing my retrospective, my gallerist, my same enterprising gallerist, got the South African ambassador to come and open the exhibition, and he was Stofile Mkenkesi, the Honorable Stofile Mkenkesi, who had previously been the Premier of the Eastern Cape. And I was very embarrassed because in my retrospective, I didn't have any images of the Eastern Cape at all. And I apologized to him. I said, I don't know why and how, but it hasn't happened. And then he told me about the 100-Year War. And I was just like, how don't I know about this? And when I came back, I found that most other people, my peers and contemporaries, were as hazy and vague about it as I was. And I realized that this is something really compelling. It gripped me. I also didn't think I could make it happen because how the hell am I going to travel around the Eastern Cape and get all these images that I need to do? But I like to say that the ancestors heard my call and they opened doors. And then Unsettled, the 100-Year War of resistance by Xhosa against Boer and British happened. And it showed about 15 times throughout South Africa, in the States, in Europe. And I published another book. I had a publisher in New York just come up to me and say, do you want to publish? We'd love to publish with you. I was like, wow, okay. Unsettled happened. So yes, this looks, I traversed the landscape of the Eastern Cape to see as best I could the absolute trauma that this country faced in that 100-year war. You can see what a war of 3 months does. Angola had 40 years of war. Mozambique, 30 years of war. Devastated. We can't understand our country unless we can factor in things like this. But you know, when I started researching this project, I realized that the Khoi had fought for more than 100 years, like almost 130 years before they were dispossessed. And I was like, okay, I need to do that as well. And then when I started looking at the Khoi, I realized, damn, it intersects with slavery. So these are the 3 different, that all intertwine epochs that I'm looking at as aftermath for us to make sense of. I went and sought out the Ndlambe people who fought and were involved and led some of these 5 of those 9 wars. And they claimed that this was their great kraal, here, where this center is.
So
My
maybe,
daughter is at this varsity now.
so maybe should we, as you keep clicking us through, shall we open it up?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, for people to engage.
A lot of the work is, I've seen some of your work, but not in a slideshow like this. So thank you for that. I was interested in this statement you made, I think towards the beginning, where there was a photograph of these men carrying a coffin with the cross, and then you kind of joked and said, I made, lots of money from that, but you were very uncomfortable, clearly. And so I'm kind of like picking up on a few comments, and I guess one focuses on what one is interested in, but also the fact that you said around how the art world is so capitalist, especially the Western art world. I don't know how different it is in South Africa now, but just yes, I guess so. And I don't know how to ask it, but the kind of ethical considerations around, obviously, there are lots of images which present landscape and have a certain thematic, but then there are also others with, women sleeping all huddled together and kind of presenting this dark side of life, like poverty. And then that's obviously sold, right? I mean, that's how I guess an artist makes money in kind of curating and publishing a book, or I don't know how you'd sell it. So where does one stand ethically? Or, you can talk from your personal point of view in this kind of photographing human bodies. And clearly those have to be seen by the world, but then the artist also has to make money. Because you kind of joked about it yourself, like where do you stand yourself in feeling a discomfort or comfort in selling these works, especially when there's kind of a explicit poverty shown in those photographs?
Firstly, they don't really sell, so
so
that's
imagine they do for lots of money.
So that resolves the issue somewhat. But secondly, no, I don't want to make light of it, but I think that I do locate myself as an activist and as an advocate, and as I come from those communities. I come from that poverty. My communities come from that poverty, and in a sense, I may have had problems with the sort of overt commercialization in the way that those particular images were used in the media. Because, the Western media is a sensationalist model. So the images are being taken out of context and sensationalized, because that's what sells that product. I used to fight with editors way back and say, all the studies show that the decisions that make somebody spend money on a publication, back in the day when we were still spending money on publications, were two initial things: the banner, the text, and the image. And most South African editors had no regard for the image. So they were shooting themselves in the foot. And, you know, the more sort of advanced Western components in Britain were, and the US were ahead of the curve. South Africans, as usual, were late to the party. But I think there is always a fine line between, take those images of the woman lying on the ground. That can be seen as poverty. That's actually resilience in that image. So there's always different ways of seeing an image. And I was always looking for resilience, not poverty, not to kind of victimize impoverished people. I was looking at where impoverished people were being courageous and resilient and human in an incredible way. So I've tried to have that. It doesn't always work because you're working in the moment. And as a photographer, you're working instinctively a lot of the time. You don't really have time to think a lot about what you're doing. You think about it before and afterwards. So yeah, but it is always a challenge. Always. It's not. There's no easy answer.
You seem to have defined yourself on a more abstract level. You have a mission. You don't define yourself by the occupation. You don't see yourself as 100% as an artist, 100% as a photographer. You seem to have accidentally somehow stumbled into this medium. My question is, do you believe you have achieved this mission? You never clearly defined this mission to us, but maybe this is in you. And my second question is, do you ever imagine yourself as have walked through another path, but reaching this mission more quickly, maybe? Or do you have any regrets? Or just curious, because when we look at these photographs, the underlying thread is you yourself, this invisible mission. Can you tell us a little bit more?
No, that's a very accurate description, portrayal. Yeah, as I said, I'm not. I think I defined it. I said I'm not a photographer's photographer. Before you arrived, I showed the other two artists who are on the residency. I'm on a residency here. That's what brought me to Cape Town. That is run by Tariq. And before you arrived, I showed a documentary film that I made to the other two artists about an art school and an arts and crafts center called Rorke. It was the Rorke Arts and Crafts Center, but it used to be an art school. It was one of the very first art schools for black people in this country. And I'll show it to you as well. I'm sure you might be interested to see it. That was the art school that I should have gone to, but I didn't know it existed. And because I'm somebody who doesn't have a matric, I could not have gone to any of the institutional art schools, but that art school would have taken me, without a doubt. And so I was somebody who should have been an artist, as a painter, etcher. That was my natural inclination to go in that direction, but I couldn't find a path. And so my path led me into the workers' movement, and I chose to engage with the struggle to transform South Africa and to do my little bit. And I settled quite as a compromise almost on photography, because the second choice after photography was to write. But I didn't feel confident with the little education that I had that I could write. But I did. I dabble. Yeah, so it's a difficult path. It's a compromised path, but it's the best you can do in a situation where many of us are compromised in many ways. Yeah. So that art school, my film on it is like a homage to the school I should have gone to.
I wanted to ask about your photographing of culture, cultural life, as it were. The few pictures that excuse my vocabulary, I'm a bit of a barbarian when it comes to visual cultures. The Sankol workers and the Bambatas descendants, the really beautiful photograph of the other photographer that was shown there. And of course, the more classic, well-known for me, picture of Thandi Klassen and Sis Dolly, Dolly Rathebe. The reason I'm asking about this is because I've been working with Brett Piper recently on his book on jazz appreciation societies, which is a very different take on South African jazz cultures and works with some of the things you've said today in terms of the ordinary, because this is not the musicians on stages in festivals or recording. These are jazz appreciation societies. And there seems to be a resonance in the sort of the transformation, transfiguration, modification of an otherwise really unsettling landscape towards something else done by people. So for what I know, the little I know, is that your jazz photography seems quite different from other types of jazz of photography of South African jazz, from Jeden Shagerberg to Basil Breaky to, what's his name? No, not Rashid. Yeah, him too. But the other oak, the one that's just been re-released with Albertine. Yeah, Ian Bruce Hatley. So to what degree would your particular perspective and interest on the ordinary, how might it shift the dial on how we discuss or how we talk through South African jazz cultures beyond the spectacle, as Candice was saying?
I didn't ever think it was different, but I suppose it was. And I think if I have to think about it, it was that we socialized with most of those musicians. We were friends with them. We hung out with them. My first year in Johannesburg, I stayed with Begi Xhosa. I shared a commune with Begi Xhosa. And I've shared communes with other jazz musicians as well. And it was an incredible experience to live with this committed musician. These were such incredibly committed musicians who were deeply involved in life, interrogating. I don't know if any of you know somebody like Begi Xhosa. He's a philosopher, you know, and he's a raconteur, and he's somebody who has a deep insight into humanity and into culture. And I wanted to start off by saying that culture is a site of struggle. And I think we recognize that we called ourselves cultural workers back in the day, in the 80s. It's a term that went out of fashion. But I still see myself as a cultural worker, not really as an artist, as a cultural worker. Because if you understand how culture is used against us, the cultural weapon is used against us to break our spirit, to break our understanding of who we are, then you understand why you need to have a different take and not see entertainment. So we are never about entertainment. Of course, we're also entertained because we're human. We are entertained, but we didn't dwell in entertainment because so many of us were the people we sort of had affinity with. Like, for instance, Zimcawana. Again, Zaidi knows some of these stories. That photographer you saw, the portrait of him, Zimngqawana and I drove him into exile together. At midnight, we took him out of harm's way, right? And so there were many things like that we did through that tumultuous short period that we had together. And we had some of my most profound conversations have been with Zimngqawana and so many other. And I always, I've also played a role as an educator in photography. I always encouraged other young photographers to cross-pollinate, because that's what, outside of an academy, as an autodidact, I had to cross-pollinate and befriend poets and writers and musicians and actors and theater producers and theater writers, and because we were all on the same project in a way. I worked on Ian Huntley's book, beautiful book. And he was a good friend as well. When I lived close to Pietermaritzburg, I used to visit him often, and experience his incredible jazz collection and his extraordinary sound system and his incredible generosity of spirit. Quite a wounded man with his own cross to bear, but he gave us this gift of that period in the Cape between mid-60s and mid-70s, when people said that there was almost nothing happening in the Cape in jazz, and he showed this profound movement that was taking place. Yeah.
It's a wonderful note to close on, Cedric, because you just reminding us again, it's not just about looking, it's about living what you see. And so, yeah, thank you for living. And thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out.